Useful Visio resources. We're going to end this training series with what is informally known as a link dump among technical professionals. At this point, you've learned everything that I have to throw at you in terms of basic Visio 2010 usage. Actually, I would say we've gone far beyond the basic level, and if you've mastered all of the techniques that I've shown you over the previous 19 or so nuggets, then you would have at least intermediate, if not near expert capability with the application by now. So to that end, I just want to pause and congratulate you for making it through the training. It's no small accomplishment for sure. So as I said, as you get better and better with Visio and you get more bang for your buck with the utility in your professional and personal lives, you'll doubtless be hungry for more. Where can I find the best Visio sites? Well, as I think I've mentioned a few times in this training, I've been using Visio since before Microsoft owned the product, and I've been surfing the World Wide Web since the early 90s. So I can share with you a lot of experience in that regard and save you some web searching in terms of finding some of the best and most powerful Visio resources on the internet. Typically, those links are going to fall into three general categories, and that's what we'll use to frame the following discussion. Number one, you have some kind of question, a support issue maybe. You know that some particular task or capability exists in Visio 2010, you're just not sure how it works or how to do it. On the other hand, you may have help of a different stripe. Perhaps you're seeing a bug or some unexpected behavior and you want to find out if it's your own installation of Visio or if other users are having the same problem. So that's certainly a very valid category in terms of useful Visio resources and links. Another is going to be, I'm happy with what Visio gives me for the most part with regard to templates, stencils, and shapes, but what else is out there? For instance, you'll remember we did a nugget on creating server rack diagrams, and I showed you we can go out to VisioCafe.com, for example, to download very realistic shapes that correspond to live hardware. You may want more of the same of that kind of resource. I'm going to show you where to go on the web to do that. Finally, I hinted a little bit towards the end of this training at some development possibilities with Visio 2010. Specifically, I shared that by using the Visio Software Developer Kit, or SDK, along with the Visual Studio Integrated Development Environment, or IDE, you can deploy custom Visio solutions. For instance, you can deploy new custom templates that display in the Backstage view with all of the metadata that you are expecting to see. High-quality previews, explanatory text, etc. I also mentioned that Visio has as its underlying automation engine this Microsoft scripting language / programming language called VBA, Visual Basic for Applications. Now, with VBA, you do not need to use Visio Studio. You can do development from within Visio itself. So where can we go on the web to learn more about that? Well, this should be a really nice, relaxing way to end the training. So put on your cognitive propeller hat if you have one of those. I know I do. One of those little multi-striped beanies that we geeks wear. Fasten your seatbelt and enjoy the ride. Let us now begin our journey in the best of the web with regard to Microsoft Visio products. Of course, we need to start at the beginning, which means Microsoft's own Office website infrastructure. This is office.microsoft.com/Visio, also known as the Visio 2010 homepage. Now, yes, there's a lot of marketing stuff on here. Microsoft is trying to sell Visio to folks who haven't yet purchased a license, whether that's a single user license or an enterprise license, it doesn't matter. But for those of us who actually already own a license for the software and who are actually already using it, we have a collection of really useful links up here in the upper left. Templates, add-ins, customer evidence, partners, business intelligence, and project management. And there's also some sites that we'll look at specifically momentarily. The Visio community. Microsoft does, in my opinion, a pretty good job of arranging its communities. Specifically, the two that I'm involved in are the Microsoft Certified Professional Community, or MCP community, and then there's the Microsoft Most Valuable Professional, or MVP community. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. Speaking of IT certification, though, another website I want you to be aware of and bookmark is Microsoft.com/learning. Their learning portal is, of course, a subset of Microsoft's corporate presence, but also is particularly cool because, of course, with learning, we're dealing with training and certification. Now, this page specifically deals with their Microsoft Office Specialist certification. Now, this certification has gone through some changes over the years, if I can get these drop-downs to go away, that is. Used to be called Microsoft Office User Specialist, but I think they received, by they I mean Microsoft, received complaints from folks who said, I don't want to exert blood, sweat, and tears and spend quite a bit of money to get a certification in which I'm labeled a mouse. Get it? M-O-U-S. So for the past few years, it's been Microsoft Office Specialist. Now, why do I bring you here? In one sense, I shouldn't, because unfortunately, there's no Visio 2010 certification. I would encourage you to write to Microsoft, send them an email message, and recommend that to them. I'm sure that if enough customers suggest that, Microsoft will create the certification. The main or core members of the Office 2010 suite are contained in this certification. Basically, there's the specialist level, the entry-level certification exam, and then there's the higher-level expert certification. Now, are these relevant to IT pros? Maybe that's questionable, but I wanted you to be aware of it just in the name of well-rounded education here. Now I want to take you to VisioToolbox.com. If you go to VisioToolbox.com, it's going to redirect to a Microsoft domain because Microsoft now owns VisioToolbox.com. And this is the Visio 2010 Resource Center. The page you're looking at specifically is a link where we can download a trial version of Visio 2010 Premium Edition. Now, as they say here, this is a fully functional 60-day product trial. Good thing to do if for no other reason than you're using the CBT Nuggets training. Now, if you are just jumping to this final video initially, I'm not sure why you would. I mentioned this fact early in the training, so you're aware of it right at the outset, but I just wanted to make another point here that Microsoft does give you, it's not limited in any way, version of the top level SKU for Visio. This is certainly helpful, like I said, for those who are pondering a purchase or they're not yet there with a purchase. They want to justify a purchase to their boss, and you want to gain some hands-on familiarity with the product. That certainly makes sense. Now let's go back to the office.microsoft.com site, and this page is called Which Edition of Visio 2010 is Right for You. I wanted to spend some time with you on this page, again, with a nod towards IT professionals who haven't yet made a purchase and want to be double Dutch sure that they're spending money wisely and not overbuying. When it comes to these variants, these Microsoft Office suites, these Office family applications like Visio, there's always the question, which version do you want to go with? So this is really an important point for us to see exactly what is included in each stock keeping unit or SKU of the Visio application. Now you'll remember that there are 3 tiers to the application. Standard is obviously the least expensive, then there's professional, and then there's premium. We can expect that premium is going to have all of the bells and whistles, and as you see, I can scroll through this table, and sure enough, every single option is enabled. Visio Professional is a mid-level solution that has a lot more than Visio Standard. There's actually a pretty good jump between Visio Standard and Visio Professional, especially in this first section that deals with templates. Now, we know how to create many of these drawings at this point, and because we're at the end of the training, it should make a lot of sense what we're talking about. So you see the first several are shared among all 3 SKUs: brainstorming templates, fishbones, cross-functional flowchart with swim lane, org charts, project management, building, architecture, detailed network, including Active Directory. Whoops, I went a little bit too far. Immediately, you should see if you're an IT pro who has need to diagram your server room, you're not going to get there from here with Visio Standard, so you need to go to at least the professional SKU for that. In fact, all of these network and IT related templates are out of the range of the Visio Standard price point. BPMN template, which we looked at, website mapping, wireframes, SharePoint workflow. In fact, these last 3 you see are reserved specifically for the top level SKU, the business process modeling notation, integration with SharePoint Server, and Six Sigma. Moving down to the next table, these are key features. Some of these are user interface features like the dynamic grid, alignment and space options. You'll remember page auto size. Fortunately, it looks like almost all all of these are contained in all of the SKU levels of Visio. It looks like the only difference is the intelligent validation. That goes specifically with the BPMN diagram, you'll remember, and also with BPMN, the notion of sub-processes, linked and unlinked. Those are reserved for premium. As far as dynamic data-driven diagrams, I hope you are duly impressed with that capability. That's one of the biggest requests I get from students who want to learn about Visio, who may know a little bit about it, but they want to learn how to link their Visio shapes to external data. Immediately, you should see that if you have any of that need, standard is off the table. Either Visio or Premium has all of that capability. Data linking, data refresh, data graphics, and data legend, which are pretty cool ways to show the data, I think you'll agree. Sharing with anyone, this deals with exporting. We can export to Adobe PDF, Microsoft's own XPS, or web in any SKU, but it looks like, and this is an important point for you IT pros whose company use SharePoint Server, that the Visio services integration that we looked at earlier in the training is applicable only to either Visio Professional or Visio Premium, so take note. With regard to customization and extensibility, an application programming interface is a set of rules that developers can use to plug their software projects into, well, in this case, Visio. So Microsoft's Fluent UI application programming interface gives you the ability to customize the user interface, the ribbon, for instance, and the command bar. Fortunately, a lot of the API stuff is applicable to all three SKUs. It looks like data-driven APIs are only the top two, and that makes sense based on what we looked at earlier with dynamic data-driven diagrams. Sub-processes and validation, you'll remember, deal with business process modeling, and earlier we established that those are part of the premium SKU. So we're seeing a couple surprises, but hopefully not too much. The final piece here is integration with other products, and in most cases, we're going to be talking about integration with other Microsoft applications. It is somewhat surprising, although not really, when you think of all of the many capabilities of Visio, that Microsoft would include Autodesk here. The AutoCAD import and export is part of all of the SKUs. It looks like Outlook, Excel, basic Office integration, basic Visual Studio programming integration, and the notion of uploading Visio documents to a SharePoint repository are applicable to any version of Visio. Again, Visio Services, we know, is only professional and premium. SharePoint Workflow is a premium feature. I didn't mean that to be cumbersome. I hope it wasn't. By contrast, I hope that you really now have a good grasp as far as the differences among the three versions of Visio. Continuing our journey at the Microsoft Download Center at microsoft.com/download. Couple downloads we want to consider. One, I can't remember for the life of me if I showed you the Visio viewer earlier in the training, but in case I didn't, I want to just make reference to it here and let you know that although Microsoft might want you to believe that purchasing SharePoint and using Visio services is the quickest and best way to deploy Visio to a browser, that's not strictly speaking true. The Visio 2010 viewer is an ActiveX control or add-in to Microsoft Internet Explorer. In other words, it's not going to work with Firefox or Safari or Opera or Conqueror or whatever. But as long as you've got access to IE versions 5 through 8, interesting that 9 isn't mentioned here, or an early version of 10 as of this recording, but this plugin, which is pretty heavy as far as plugins goes, almost 17 megabytes, once installed will enable the rendering of VSD files, standard Visio files, in a web browser. So this is a way around, look, I want somebody to view my Visio file in its native format. They don't have Visio installed. What can I do to help them? This is an answer to that question. Back to Visio Toolbox at visio.microsoft.com. This, again, has the traditional marketing stuff here, but I want to draw your attention specifically to the samples and downloads area, because this is where we can access an online repository of diagrams and templates, business intelligence mashups, and software add-ins that Microsoft has tested and vetted themselves. So it's part of the community aspect here of Visio 2010 in particular and the Office family in general. So if we look at the software add-ins list, just as of this recording, what it's showing up, we have a SharePoint network topology diagram add-in. Now that looks pretty cool. If you, for instance, have a SharePoint topology rolled out, you obviously want to document that environment. What better way to do it than to create a data linked diagram in Visio 2010? This add-in add-in, I would presume, will scour your network and pick up the SharePoint topology markers in a similar way to how earlier in the training I showed you how we can scour Active Directory. Here we have a similar mapping add-in for Exchange Server. Here's another one for Rack Server Virtualization. Here's another for those who are using the Microsoft System Center Operations Manager suite. A lot of very powerful resources here for us IT professionals, so this may be one of the most useful sites that I'm sharing with you now. On the development side of the fence, we have this website, which is at msdn.com. I mentioned this before, but for those of you who are not yet developers, MSDN is Microsoft's programming or development division. Essentially, you have the TechNet infrastructure for IT pros and for empowered end users, so-called information workers, and then we have the Microsoft Developer Network, or MSDN, for those of us who program in the .NET framework. So the Visio product team, for whatever reason, hosts their blog on MSDN rather than TechNet. I wish that they updated it a little bit more frequently. You see that the most recent blog post was put up 2 months ago. The best blogs, as you know, and I think you'd agree, are ones that are published almost daily, but what can you do? The other point I want to make about development is to return to the Microsoft Download Center and remind you that if you have interest in building your own add-ins, deploying your own templates, the starting point for that is the Visio 2010 Software Development Kit, or SDK. This is a very small collection of files and libraries. It's very low bandwidth as far as getting it on your computer, 7 megabytes. The Visio Viewer ActiveX control weighs more than the entire Visio 2010 SDK. And those of you who are programmers would agree that it's pretty impressive because many Microsoft SDKs go on for several hundred megabytes. Anyway, this download page tells you exactly what's in there. One of the best things that's in there for us who are perhaps newer to development in general and Visio development in particular are code samples, because I've found in my own development experience, in many cases, the best way for me to build a solution is to look at what somebody else has done, learn from their best practices as I build out my own, you see? So that's the Visio SDK, or Software Development Kit. Yet another site. This is at msdn.microsoft.com. This is the Visio Developer Center, where we can find programming resources for all versions of Visio. Of course, we're interested in Visio 2010. A lot of really good stuff here. Generally speaking, MSDN, and once you get into the TechNet pages on the IT Pro side, they lose all of the marketing sales stuff and they concentrate just on the guts of the technology. And that, of course, is what we're most interested in here. This is interesting. On this page, we have an article called Visio Developer Roadmap. And this, I think, would be a really nice page for you to look at. Tells us that we can get references, code samples, articles, book chapters, and how-to videos. And then it breaks down the categories of development. Because you may be thinking, if you are a .NET developer, how much is there to do in Visio really? And there's actually quite a bit. There's mastering automation with Visio Basic for applications, or Visual Basic for applications, I should say, creating macros, etc. within the application. Using the shape sheet, which was formally beyond the scope of this training, but if you're going to do Visio development, you'll absolutely want to get under the hood of your drawing and manage the shape sheet. The issue of managed code, that's a code word for .NET framework-based development using Visual Studio tools. Visio services in SharePoint, again, the ribbon or fluent user interface, using OpenXML technologies, Visio drawing control, etc. Good stuff. Final thing I want to say about development is I want to take you to Codeplex.com. Codeplex is Microsoft's open source project community. Now, you may or may not have heard of a site called SourceForge.net. SourceForge has been around a lot longer than Codeplex. Some might say that Codeplex is a semi-ripoff of SourceForge. But anyway, SourceForge is an open source project community where you can build out a mini site within their infrastructure and host your code, host your entire project. And because we're talking open source, we're talking about sharing that source code to get feedback from other developers. It's an excellent way to build as close to bulletproof software as you can get. Now that's interesting, some think, including myself, that Microsoft would embrace open source to any degree because, as we know, all of their technologies are closed source proprietary products. Nonetheless, we have Codeplex.com, and we can search the directory based on a product. We can look at the tag cloud. As a matter of fact, let me click that just for a moment. As you know, a tag cloud allows us to see where most of the content is focused using these taxonomic tags. Let's see if we can see Visio in the list. No, not really. There's a lot on Visual Studio, web services, and SharePoint, but I'm not seeing much with Visio specifically. So let's do a search for Visio. And yeah, it looks like that there's Visio stuff there, certainly. As a matter of fact, I know I showed you this Visio Forward Engineer add-in earlier in the training. So that's Codeplex for you. Let's end this demonstration and end this course with a nod toward the other couple of categories of links. First of all, extending Visio in terms of its templates, stencils, and shapes. Where do we get additional stencils and shapes? One of my favorite sites for Visio is Visio Guy. It's visguy.com. And his links page, I wish that he would update it a little bit more again, but he has links to several companies who make available custom stencils and shapes, all right? And there's also a lot on Visio Development, Visio General, and again, some of these links go back and are quite outdated as far as that goes, but it's at least a starting point. Pretty much the industry standard site, kind of a clearinghouse for downloading specific stencils and shapes that map to real gear, is VisioCafe.com. And what's especially cool is that these shapes are all free. For instance, we can come to Dell and we can download all of the stencils in one huge archive, or if we know specifically what product line or type of hardware we want to model in Visio, we can find those. So Visio Cafe would be your first stop, it seems to me. You'll also, again, and I know I mentioned this earlier when I showed you how to create server room and rack diagrams, you can turn to a search engine, your favorite one, Google or Bing, and just run a search for things like Cisco, Visio, stencils. And if it's a major manufacturer, an original equipment manufacturer like Cisco or Hewlett-Packard or even Microsoft for that matter, you can find, by using a search engine the best way, a link. I mean, this is a page at the Cisco.com infrastructure where they actually have an add-on, it looks like. That's new to me. Interesting. Fully documented, and then we can specifically go down and download stencils. As you see, these are VSS files that deal with different Cisco interfaces, modules, product families, etc. And Cisco is just an example I pulled off the top of my head. Just a simple Google search is what you need to do here. Now, with regard to getting help, where do you go if you have a question or you need to ask for advice on Visio 2010? First of all, I would recommend you check out the Microsoft support communities. This is free. There's no support cost involved here. This is at microsoft.com/communities. And the communities are, in general, pretty well attended. The forums are traditional discussion forums. I'll open this in a separate tab. Blogs is a collection of Microsoft blogs written by Microsoft employees. And we also have another category of individual called the MVP, or the Most Valuable or Microsoft Valuable Professional. I want to just do a little sidestep over to that for a moment. MVPs are folks who have demonstrated to Microsoft that they are experts in a particular technology, and they are recognized as such by being awarded the MVP, which conveys really nice benefits for the MVP, not the least of which much higher visibility in the community, and it's certainly something to put on your resume that you are an MVP in Windows Server or SharePoint or Visio or whatever the case might be. This site, visio.mvps.org, is a kind of an aggregation or clearinghouse of best practices and resources put together by a bunch of Visio MVPs. Again, it's not particularly updated as much as I would like. The history page is particularly cool. It gives you a lot of geeky information on every version of Visio ever published, whether it was Shapeware or Microsoft. Tells you the exact version numbers, the exact release date, even the executable name, size, core DLLs of the support files. Isn't that cool? For a geek like me, that's pretty interesting stuff. You can search for a particular Visio MVP at the Microsoft MVP site. I'm at mvp.support.microsoft.com, and I just ran a search for Visio, and this is a list of current Visio MVPs. As of this recording in early 2012, there are only 15. So you might want to gather some steam and do what you can to be a helpful Visio expert in the community, and maybe you can become an MVP. It's pretty cool. Now, where do those MVPs hang out? Generally speaking, at the Microsoft support forums. You'll remember, as I showed you a minute or so ago, at the Microsoft technical community sites, we can go into the forums home, and then in there you have a sub-forum based on different products and versions of Microsoft software. Specifically there, the most popular are, because they're the most active, we have developer forums, IT pro forums, and then what Microsoft calls their Answers forum, which is intended mostly for home users. This can be helpful, because even though you are an IT professional yourself, you may have a question that qualifies as an end user question. So we can just do a search, and I'm searching for Visio 2010, and we see a question and a little blurb of what that question is asking. You can immediately see if the question has been considered answered or is in need of an answer. There's a voting system that is an incentive for people to be helpful and to get final answers for people. Really well-run forum. I'm a big fan of it myself. The community blogs, like I said, are blogs by Microsoft employees, and you can just do a search based on a product family. I'll choose Visio with no keywords, and we can come back with links, some of which, actually all of these, are pretty old. That's one thing that you'll find. I'm sure you've probably already found it as an IT professional. We are busy people, and it is hard work to maintain a blog or any online web presence and be really up to date. I mean, let's face it, technology moves at the speed of light, or as Bill Gates said in his book, technology moves faster than the speed of thought. So as a very busy IT professional, think of how difficult it would be to commit to publishing even a couple blog posts a week. For most pros, that's pretty hard to do. So I cut Microsoft some slack in this regard. Very final site I want to show you, and I'm going to close all my other tabs to make this nice and easy, is the Microsoft Events website at events.microsoft.com. Some of you learn best by seeing and hearing, not just reading. So Microsoft Events is where you can download podcasts. They call them webcasts, of course, because Microsoft and Apple are competitors, and Apple uses podcast, Microsoft uses webcast, whatever. But what's cool about this is, again, you can search on a technology and check out these webcasts. You can either attend them live if they're coming up in the future. The registration is almost always free. Microsoft records these so you can view them after they've actually happened. So you see here we have a webcast and a podcast of the same presentation called What's New in Project 2010 and Visio 2010. I'm not sure if that's a video or just an audio podcast, but if you're like me and you like to listen to audio stuff on your mobile device, why, this is a great way to learn, so I wanted to make reference to that to you. There you have it. I hope you found these links helpful, friends. Useful Visio Resources Review. In this nugget, I took us out onto the web, and I shared with you the best Visio websites and online resources that I could find or that I actually use. It's important, again, to underscore that I use Visio, if not every day, at least a few times or several times a week in my profession. So I'm not teaching about something that I don't have solid practical experience in. And to that end, all of the links I shared with you in this nugget are links that I rely upon myself. You'll recall by way of review that those links were in 3 categories. We looked at various first and third party support and help sites. We then moved into extending the Visio environment and where we can find for fun, for free, and for cost third-party and even first-party stencils, shapes, and templates. And then we turned our attention briefly to the development question, which really could constitute an entirely separate CBT Nuggets course. And to that end, if you do have interest in learning more about Visio 2010 development, or any other topic for that matter, please contact the CBT Nuggets sales department at support@cbtnuggets.com. They're really, really friendly, great people, and they certainly do listen to you, the customer/the student, and I as a trainer would be overjoyed to teach you more about Visio, so keep that in your mind. Again, I want to congratulate you on completing this training. You've come a long way, I'm sure, and I look forward to receiving your feedback. If you have a particularly cool and effective Visio diagram that you've crafted in your job and you want to share it with me, I promise I won't publish it or use it for my purposes without your express permission, believe me. I love to hear from my students. If by contrast you have a question, you need some clarification on this training, whatever, please feel free to reach out to me. My email address is timothy@nuggetlab.com, and I always answer email from my students. To that end, I wish you nothing but the best in your IT certification studies and your IT profession, and of course, all the best to you and yours in your personal lives. Thanks again. I hope that this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.